Thanks, Sam. And we have slides, which is great. Let's see if I can figure it out. So I know I'm here to talk about the Dekado Survey process, but since this is the only time I'm going to get to address this group from up here in front, I wanted to take a quick opportunity just to give you a little bit of current information that may be of interest to the community. We are within Planetary Science Division. We've had a couple of personnel changes over the last few months that I think people might want to know about. First off, Jonathan Rawl, who was running our RNA program for quite a long time, many years, has accepted a new position in the Office of Chief Scientist at NASA headquarters. This is, of course, a loss to Planetary Science Division, but we're excited for him in this new phase of his career. So as he has gone, that has left an opening within Planetary Science Division for the Research and Analysis program. I'm very happy that as of September 3rd, Stephen Reinhardt, who's been a program officer within the RNA program, he stepped in and accepted a detail assignment, 6-month detail assignment as the RNA lead. And he's doing a great job in that role, but we are hoping to permanently refill that position. So I wanted to let the community know that we will be advertising that openly and publicly, probably in the end of November, early December timeframe. So keep an eye open for that. If it's something that you feel a calling toward, this is a really, really important job. As you know, everyone who writes their research proposals knows just how important that role is. So if it's something you're interested in, feel free to let me know, reach out. I can tell you a little bit more about it, and keep an eye out for that opening coming up. I'm also really happy that we now have a permanent replacement for the Deputy Division Director. David Scher stepped down in February, and just a couple weeks ago, I brought on Eric Iansen as a new Deputy Division Director for Planetary Science Division. Eric comes to us from the Earth Science Division, where he has many years of experience as the Associate Director for their flight programs, and he's really experienced. He's a fantastic guy, and I think you're all going to really enjoy interacting with him. I know he's going to AGU, so that'll be probably your first opportunity to really get to know him. I also brought on Joan Salute as an associate director for all of our flight programs, all the flight programs except for Mars. It's still Jim Watson is the lead for Mars. But I brought Joan on. She's been the program executive for Europa Clipper for many years now, very, very experienced program executive, and I'm really looking forward to having her in this new role overseeing all of our non-Mars flight projects. So just a little update. Now we'll talk about Dekado Survey. Sorry about that. So I like to put up the fleet chart real quick because to me this is an incredible snapshot of where we are today in the Planetary Science Division flight programs. And this is in large part the result of the last Dekado Survey. What you see on this chart are some incredible missions that we were able to begin, that Planetary Science Division was able to implement in large part due to the last 2 Dekado surveys. So it's an incredibly important process, not only for defining the science that we want to do, but also in helping to line out how we want to achieve that science through additional flight missions. And I've heard some discussions about the last Dekado Survey. As many of you know, you saw on Colleen's chart, there were some dips in funding. And at the time the last Dekado Survey came out, there were some pretty significant cuts to the Planetary Science Division's budget. But the fact that that Dekado Survey really thought big and put some great ideas out there, when that budget started to recover, there were some really good opportunities in the Dekado Survey to take full advantage of that funding and implement some amazing missions. So this is a great snapshot in time, and we're looking forward to more in the future going forward. So I think Colleen already spoke quite a bit about the Dekado Survey process. As she said, we are planning to really kick it off in full measure next June with the meetings. And again, with final report hopefully delivered in about the 2022 timeframe in preparation for the decade beginning 2023. We worked really closely with National Science Foundation to come up with our initial draft of the Statement of Task. It's important to realize, even though the National Science Foundation is relatively a small component compared to NASA's planetary science work, it's an important part. In particular, the ground-based observation assets and the science research that they fund. So that's really important. We've been working with them to develop the Statement of Task. And as Colleen said, we're now in the early stages of trying to negotiate and work back and forth. Actually, since this slide went final last Friday, there's actually movement on this. It says we were in concurrence. We actually now have moved past that, and we're into this stage where we're starting the discussions with the national academies. As Colleen said, the chair, we hope, will be announced in the spring, preferably by the LPSC. It was a great opportunity to make that announcement, so that's our target, but we don't have that official schedule yet. And then Sam mentioned earlier the discussion around what the structure of the next decadal survey is going to be like. There was a question regarding this particular topic. It's something that's very strong interest to me that I've been looking into for the last year, maybe longer, year and a half. And this is the idea that instead of organizing the decadal survey by destination targets, considering the possibility of organizing the decadal survey by big science questions. And as Sam said, this was a question I sent out to all of the assessment groups and asked for some input from the community. It was intended to be a fun thought exercise, not a chore. And I got some amazing input back from the community. It was really, really interesting. And that feedback fed into the meeting of the CAPS committee, the Committee on Astrobiology and Planetary Science, and their meeting in September was very focused on that topic, and a lot of really good discussion about what those big science questions might be and how you might structure a decadal survey around big science questions, the pluses and minuses of that. Really thorough and thoughtful discussion for 2.5 days. Really a great discussion. And so we'll see, as Colleen said, we're in the process of finalizing of what that statement of task will look like, and the structure of the panel will hopefully flow from that discussion. But I'm very thankful to the LEAG and all of the assessment groups for taking the time to put the thought into those big science questions. It was a really, really good exercise. I believe this is more or less consistent with the chart that Colleen showed. I don't see any major disconnects there. And again, as she said, this is still notional until we actually have our contract with the national academies and we have the chair named. This isn't final, but this at least gives you a sense for what you can be working on now, thinking about the white papers in a general sense of when those white papers might actually be requested. So in preparation for the decadal survey, one of the big things that we've been thinking about is, as a result of a report from the CAPS committee that getting ready for the next Planetary Science decadal survey, where it was recommended that we try and fund some mission concept studies in advance of the survey itself. And this was in a response to the last decadal survey, where all of the mission concept studies were studied as part of the decadal survey process, which actually ended up having many, many missions on top of each other. It was a challenge for the implementing centers, the engineering centers, to do the work all on top of each other. It was a large amount of funding needed all at once. And so this is an attempt to try and spread some of that out, do some of the work in advance, some pre-work that we think might be of use, of interest to the decadal survey process. It does not preclude the ability to conduct additional studies as part of the decadal survey process, but this will hopefully give us a little bit of a head start. And so as part of the CAPS report, there were several potential mission concepts that were suggested. They were not, it wasn't a list of you must do these, but it was a nice list to start, to have as a starting point. And we put out a call for planetary mission concept studies last spring. The proposals were due at the end of May. We received 54 proposals in response to that call. A lot of really great ideas. Of course, we couldn't possibly fund all of those prior to the decadal survey. We could only have enough funding for about 8 to 10 of those, but we actually selected 11, which I think is a positive response. And those reports that will result from those studies will feed into the decadal survey process. So those should be completed over the next about 8 or 9 months. I do want to make sure that everyone realizes that just because your concept perhaps was not selected as part of this process, that does not mean it will not be considered. I highly encourage everyone to work on those white papers and start developing strong white papers in support of your ideas and get those fed into the decadal survey process. As Colleen says, every paper will be read, every paper will be considered very seriously. So if you have a concept, get those in, and the Dekado Survey panels will have the opportunity to identify which additional studies they'd like to conduct, in addition to the ones that we're selecting. So I thought I'd just walk through very quickly the ones that we have selected to go forward. We worked very hard to try and base the selection on what appeared to be the merit of the science concept in general, although it didn't have to be completely defined, but that there was merit there within the science concept, that the individuals, the scientists that were identified were a good and diverse, broad group of people that could assess the science mission concepts, that they had put together a coherent plan for how they were actually going to complete the study and develop science traceability matrices on a time frame that would allow us to have a good result in time for the Dekado Survey process. And so those were the primary criterion on which the proposals were assessed. And then we tried to make a selection across as broad a selection of targets as we could to get some representation. So we have, in fact, a study to look at a Mercury lander. We have a Venus flagship mission concept study. We have 3 lunar, I think Sam mentioned earlier, there are 3 lunar concepts here, one being an opportunity to reassess the geophysical network, which is, of course, part of the Dekado Survey, but there's been a lot of progress in thought over the last 20 years since that concept was originally envisioned. And so this is a good opportunity to go back and kind of rethink where we would want to take that kind of concept today. There's also a study to look at in situ geochronology for the next decade, not necessarily strictly for the moon, but certainly relevant for the moon. And I think that that's the intent is to look at the moon as a potential target, but the concept could actually go even broader than just the moon. And then the Intrepid Planetary mission concept is for a long-lived rover on the surface of the moon that could survive for many, many, many days, many lunar days, and visit multiple sites and do good science on the surface of the moon. There's also 2 Mars proposals. The Mosaic concept is a constellation of Mars orbiters that are focused on trying to really focus on questions at the interface between the atmosphere, the surface, and even subsurface influences on the atmosphere, looking at that as a system, Mars as a system. The Maury concept is another orbiter really focused on trying to really quantify where the ice deposits are on Mars and how we might access those. We have a study to look at the Ceres, the dwarf planet Ceres, and looking at its habitability potential. Flagship concept, looking at Enceladus as a target for astrobiology. And Odyssey is a strategic mission looking at the Neptune-Triton system. And then finally, a concept that would be another Pluto orbiter and Kuiper Belt exploration mission to actually go into orbit at Pluto, which is a challenging thing to do from a dynamics perspective. So these will all be kind of, I think, stretch us beyond and see where we might go next in our planetary mission process. The white papers, we've already talked quite a bit about this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this particular slide. But I did want to say that in addition to what Colleen said, this process is led by the national academies. We expect the format of the white papers to be very similar to what they were last time. They were about 7 pages long. I expect that similar format. Colleen mentioned that for astrophysics, they actually had 2 calls for white papers. At this point, it's not clear that we would do the same for planetary. At the CAPS meeting, we had a discussion about keeping the same approach as last time, which would be a single call, but stay tuned for that unless there are some additional developments. Louise mentioned that the LPI website is going to be a central location where everyone from the community can look for different types of white papers that are being planned. The AGs are, of course, doing a great job of mobilizing their individual communities, but we wanted to make sure that if there are scientists and individuals out there who do not necessarily feel a particular affiliation to an ag, they have other places, they have the LPI or other opportunities to get engaged with white paper development. And then we do expect to have several town halls and other engagement activities coming up in the coming months to find more opportunities to engage with the science community and help answer questions and give you updates on where we are in this whole process. At a minimum, we already have a town hall scheduled at the AGU with David Smith and myself hosting that one. We will, of course, have one at LPSC. Hopefully we'll be fully engaged and running at that point. And then we'll have also at LPSC, the Planetary Mission Concept Studies, we'll have a workshop, a day where the entire community can come and get an update and hear a status of those concepts, see what they're doing, see where they're going, and get some feedback and engagement from the community on those concept studies. And in addition to what's on here, we are in the process of working with the academies, as Colleen stated, to engage the early career community. How that's going to look exactly, we don't have the details, but we're working on that right now as we speak. And I'm really looking forward to modeling on something similar to what the astrophysics community, and building, maybe improving it even with broader participation, perhaps through some initial webinars to get more of the community involved, and then potentially a face-to-face meeting in the spring. And as Colleen said, lots of opportunities for early career scientists to be involved in white paper development, to attend meetings, to be a part of this process. And so we're trying to reach as broad an audience as possible. Let's see. All right, I'll take questions if there's time. Thank you.
Good morning, Lori. David Kring, LPI. The process that you and Colleen described is clearly a Planetary Science Division process, but you're not working in a vacuum. We have LDEP within S&D. We have Artemis kind of agency-wide, but HUMD. What kind of boundaries is this decadal panel going to have in dealing with those other components?
So, David, that's a great question. And of course, until we have this task statement finalized, there's still some wiggle room and things. But I do want to point out that there are some really important aspects of the Planetary Science Division that we would like to incorporate and be part of that discussion. And of course, we have to be aware of what's going on in human exploration and how we work together, where those collaboration opportunities exist, and where we can leverage and work and leverage the capabilities and make sure that we're taking advantage as best we can of those opportunities. Other things, of course, as you say, Lunar Discovery and Exploration Program, the budget line runs through Planetary Science Division, and certainly the lunar science that can be done through LDEP is a big part of our Planetary Science Division portfolio. So we see that also as a big part of what we do. We also have Planetary Defense Program, which is an important part of the Planetary Science Division, and as well as astrobiology. So all of these things make up the Planetary Science Division, and all will be part of the discussion through the decadal process.
Hi, Lori. Wes Patterson, APL. I have a how and a when question about the PMCS process. The how question is, now that we have had a round of selections, is the slate wiped clean? And so white papers are going to be the primary vehicle for looking at potential additional missions, or are you going to use the well of additional proposals that were submitted but not selected for additional potential missions?
So the process for providing information into the Decadal Survey is through the white paper process, right? So through the 11 studies that we've selected for funding, we will fund those to actually go in and do some engineering studies at the 3 centers, either at APL, JPL, or Goddard. And they will produce a report for which we've provided a template and the kind of information that they need to submit to the Decadal Survey that allows the trace process that Colleen was suggesting. Outside of that, any of the additional concepts, as I said, a lot of good ones in there, really should be thinking about the white papers that can go in and argue to make the case that the Decadal Survey should initiate their own engineering studies to go off and do the legwork that's required in order to get the detail that you would need in order to do that trace process.
Okay, thanks. And then the when question is it a request from the committees that's going to spark getting additional studies, or funding available to do them, or a little bit of both?
The process, I'll tell you how it worked last time. I expect it will be analogous this time. The last time, as I was on the panel last time, one of the sub-panels for Dekado Survey, we received many white papers. We read through every single one, and then we identified and had discussions within the sub-panels about which ones we would like to see additional engineering work done. That was fed up through the steering committee of the Dekado Survey, and then that steering committee selected which ones the Dekado Survey process would fund and where they would go, which centers they would go to for those studies. And so those went out, they were investigated with full engineering backing from each of the centers, and then those reports fed back into the Dekado Survey.
Oh, and so those funds are still set aside?
Yes, there is funding through the Dekado Survey process, the funding that we give to the national academies to support those studies.
Thanks.
Clive Neal, University of Notre Dame. Hi, Laurie. Question about samples. This last solar system workings call sort of axed Apollo samples out of it, and it came as a bit of a shock to the community. There was also a National Academy study done on strategic investments. Haven't heard any response to that. Maybe you gave it and I just didn't see it, but that recommended opening up more opportunities for studying Apollo samples through the LARS program maybe, or maybe even LDAP. But for the sample community, it seems to be becoming restricted rather than opening up.
I really appreciate your comment, Clive. And we did produce a response to the facilities study. It should be posted. If it's not, I will follow up and we will make sure it's posted. Our response, I mean, the study itself, of course, is posted, but our response, we try to post those on the LPI website, and if it's not there, I will make sure we get it up there.
I haven't checked out the LPI
Yeah,
website.
check that. And certainly there were a lot of great recommendations in that study. They were very expansive, and some of them I think are easier to implement than others, and some are going to require more funding than we possibly have. But your points are well taken as far as the opportunities for sample analysis, and I will have to defer to Sarah to answer more specifics about where we are with the actual programs for doing the analyses.
That's also why I got up. We are adding a clarification to the SSW call. It doesn't exclude lunar samples, it just tries to clarify where lunar sample analysis go into SSW versus emerging worlds.
Okay.
So there'll be a clarification.
Okay. So
it's not excluded.
Well, it was this time. So proposals were sent back to people proposing to analyze Apollo samples, saying that it wasn't the right call for it. So
okay.
But that might have been what one was trying to do with the samples. It's looking at emerging worlds versus SSW is looking at current processes going on the moon. Yep. Versus
understood that. So what do you do in between? So, but anyway, I'm glad I could.
This is a really good point, Clive. I suggest that you have some additional follow-up discussion with Shoshana and Sarah, and we'll make sure we get everything.
Oh yeah, we'll do that.
Thank you.
Hi,
Bill.
Bill Bodke, Southwest Research Institute. So as part of preparing for this meeting and the breakout sessions, we were asked to examine some things about RNA. So I was looking back at the record. So about 2 years ago, it was suggested that in order to maximize maximize the science of going back to the moon, and also to address decadal survey problems, or it was NASA said we're going to make augmentations to several different programs, specifically calling out lunar proposals as something we wanted to do. And then the money for that never materialized. Okay, so now we're going forward into a new decade. If you go back to some National Academy reports in the past, they've suggested starting programs like a fundamental lunar science program and the rest. What's your view on all this? How do we address these decadal survey programs within the existing system?
It's a really good question. So I feel like there's definitely room for additional work here. I think that we have to go back and think about how exactly we're addressing the various lunar science questions that are out there. The funding that was promised for last year that was hoped for did not materialize. We weren't able to expand those. We are able to, through the Lunar Discovery Program, we have been able to fund a lot of additional activity, certainly in instrument building, in the instrument development. But as far as the science goes, we're going to need to find additional funding in order to support that. Thanks.